Good morning. Hello, Christine James here with Coffee and Convo with Christine. I'm wondering, we're gonna tackle this topic of gluten and gluttony today. But why do we even care about what we eat? Like when we think about gluten, why is this even an issue? Like this is as believers, as followers of Christ, let's talk about why this is even something we should think about. Okay, there are like these surface level whys that we might have, whether it's, we want to lose a few pounds, we want to have some energy, we want to be a better mom and laugh with our spouse, or we want to have the capacity and the capability to go on that mission trip, to lead that Bible study, to serve in the church, to, all of these things are so good. But there is really a deeper why that we as Christ followers really need to reach for if we want to make this like lasting, thriving change in our life, so that we can, like, our goal, our why really needs to be about living as more than a conqueror in the abundant life that God has already given us, right? So that we can fulfill the purpose of God in our life, so that we can experience relationship with Him, so that we can have an eternal impact, right? It's not just about this temporary world that we're living in, because a lot of those whys are going to fade. But if we invest in that, in our health and stewarding our body well, this is going to actually translate into the eternal kingdom, right? Right? Okay, so this is why we at Train in Truth talk about the details of the body and how to steward our body well, because it all boils down to really walking out the call of God on our life in full capacity and capability that Christ has for us, right? So that is kind of the basis of all of this discussion. So if you are coming in, drop a comment, let me know you're here, say hello, happy Friday, what are you doing this weekend, all of those good things. I would love to hear who's here. Okay, I see. Can you write your name in, because I'm using StreamYard? Here's a little housekeeping. I cannot see your name unless you approve StreamYard access to that information about your name. So I can see your comments. I just won't be able to see your name unless you approve it. And it's super simple. Okay, let's dig right in. Can we dig right in? I would love to hear who's here. When you pop in, say hello. I want to hear what's resonating with you. If you have an insight that you can share as we're going around, or going through all of these things, I totally, like, we all want to just hear all of the things. Let's talk about these things. So the agenda today is, well, we're talking about the why, right? The main reason we're doing all of this. It's important. We're going to talk about how Jesus is our sustenance. And we really, as we focus on our intake of food and stewarding our body, it really needs to be more on Him than like the details of gluten, right? Our focus has got to be on Him. And we're going to talk about how Jesus turns our meager resources into abundance. We're going to look at gluttony in the Bible. We're going to get into practical things about gluten and its aliases and hiding spots. And we're going to talk about, if you decide that going gluten-free is going to be a good thing for you, how to make that switch. So let's dig in. We're going to go through all these things. Okay, so we talked about the why at the very beginning when I popped on. So if you are just popping on late, go back and listen to that, because this is really important as we pursue stewarding our health, to know why exactly we're doing it. we're going to go into all the practical details about gluten, but I want to dig into some scripture first, and truth about gluten and about, food. When it comes to bread, do you love it? Who doesn't love bread? Seriously? It is so good, right? Bread is good. And Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And that was in John 6:35. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. So let's not, as we're looking at food, let's not just associate good and bad, right? We can't say bread in general is bad, especially if Jesus says he's the bread, right? Okay, I know I'm getting a little off here, but when we're looking at how Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Now, this is in John 6. And if you look at the beginning of John 6, this is where, oh gosh, I think that just snoozed it. I might have to fix that on my phone. But in the beginning of chapter 6, John chapter 6, this is where Jesus feeds the 5,000. And he asks his disciples. They're out in the middle with all of these people. And he turns to his disciples and he says, how are we going to feed everyone? I mean, of course he knew, right? He knew, but he was challenging and teaching his disciples. And Philip says, in response to this question, he says, it would be 6 months worth of wages to feed these people. And there's no way we could even go get it. We're in the middle of nowhere. It's going to take forever to go get food and bring it back, in especially that amount, right? So he was very practical. Philip was very looking at the practical things. And then we've got Andrew who comes, and Andrew brings this boy with just a few fish, sardines, really. They were like these tiny little, they were meant to be it's like pate, like these types of fish was just very ho-hum. It was not a meal. And then a few loaves of barley. And when we're looking at barley, this bread, it was considered almost livestock food. Really simple, not substantial, delicious bread. We think of the stale bread that we might maybe be able to use for, dipped in something or, and barley was often just fed to livestock. So we see this boy, this just young boy, brings what he has. And in the hands of Jesus, this little substance becomes an abundance. A moment ago, they belonged to this lad, and now they belong to Christ. Spurgeon says, Jesus took the loaves, and once he has taken possession of them, they are his property. Okay, this is how it associates with our topic here. When it comes to gluten and sugar, or making any kind of other change in our habits or in our consumption of things, it can seem really big and overwhelming. But when we give our weak and little offerings, there's no telling what God can do. Really no telling what God can do. And it's actually in the little choices. It's in the small things that we it's in the small things that we put our hands to. It's not normally going to be this big miraculous fanfare as we switch and start thriving in life. It's going to be subtle. This commentary, Trench, he says, the multiplication of the food was obviously not done with great fanfare. This is so true that we aren't told specifically where this multiplication happened. It seems to have happened as Jesus broke the bread and fish and distributed them to the disciples. It was not the integral loaves or the integral fishes that were multiplied, but the broken portions of them. Isn't that interesting? I just find that so fascinating. That as we just give little pieces of ourselves, God takes possession of what we have. What's he going to do? What he can do in that. And it's just little by little. This commentary goes on and he says, most everyone ate and was filled, but had no idea that a miracle was happening. Jesus relied on the labor of the disciples in this great miracle. He could have created bread and fish in the pocket or bag of every person, but he didn't. Jesus deliberately chose a method that brought the disciples into the work. So, when it comes to our healing in our body, in our emotions, and in our thoughts, our God is asking us to participate. He wants us to be a part of it all. I mean, not always. Sometimes, the miraculous healing really takes place, right? But I want us to consider that God is asking us to partner with him in the miracle of our healing and our thriving, right? So, while Jesus says he's the bread of life, we can know that he's saying that he provides the sustenance that is needed for our eternal and spiritual well-being. And he's not necessarily talking about the physical aspect of it, right? He meets all of our needs on each of these levels. Because he also made it very clear that man does not live on bread alone, right? So as we transition into the topic of gluttony, and I want to tie it in with our discussion of gluten here. I want you to really consider these sayings of Jesus as you're thinking about this. He says, I am the bread of life. Man does not live on bread alone. Okay? Okay, so gluttony. Gluttony shows up in the Bible in the form of this Greek word, zaula. Zaulal. Okay, I don't really know how to pronounce it, but it means, now figuratively, there is a practical meaning to it, but we're going to talk about the figurative as it applies to what we're talking about today. It means to be loosely moral, worthless or prodigal, blown down, glutton, riotous eater, or vile. Okay, so Proverbs 28:7, it says, whoever keeps the law is a discerning son, but a companion of gluttons shames his father. Proverbs 23:20 and 21 says, do not mix with wine bibbers or gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. So, as we look in the Bible about this topic of gluttony, well, there's not a ton of scriptures on it, specifically this word, gluttony. There's so much more when it comes to the concept of love, of fear, of light and dark, of sheep and shepherding, and this idea of glutton and gluttony as one of the 7 deadly sins. I talked a little bit about it last week and how it came about. And how gluttony is considered, a deadly sin versus permissible sin. It's kind of interesting, but as I was doing my research on gluttony, I came across this article by a nutritionist. Oh, what's his name? Ryan Andrews. He's a nutritionist and he's got a bunch of other certifications. But it was really interesting. I don't know if he's a believer at all. But he says Jesus taught humans that they cannot live by bread alone. Gluttony related to food is rarely mentioned in the Christian Bible. You'll see more about enjoying food in the Christian Bible than warning against it. This was an interesting note that he had added. He adds, after observing the donut spread at a Methodist church last Sunday, this doesn't surprise me. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to conserve my thoughts on that. Still, the New Testament encourages one to be sensible with intake and observe the body as a temple. The question that we may want to ask ourselves about this term glutton, it might be, does gluttony involve simply how much we eat? Or should it apply more broadly to our overall consumption patterns? Yeah. What do you think, Lenny? Who else is here? What do you think? Diane shared some really insightful thoughts about this in the group earlier this week. It really, I believe, is just about putting something above Christ, right? What are we focusing on? What are we consuming more than needed in excessive amount, right? Without that kind of discipline. Okay. There's some thoughts on gluttony. I want to move on to gluten in particular. Now, the thing when it comes to this overconsumption is biologically, our body has a hard time when it comes to processed gluten and when it comes to, any kind of carbohydrate. So the gluten, we talked about last week, how our gluten has been modified, right? So it's not like, now we have like 42 different strands of gluten, which is mostly GMOs, genetically modified. So our body has a hard time recognizing it, and it kind of becomes like toxins within our system. And our body doesn't know how to handle it. And also, I want to note on the side of carbohydrates, okay, this is really interesting. And we talk about this in the sugar break up with sugar boot camp, but that our body, the carbohydrates bypass the part in the brain that tells us that we're full. Interesting, right? If we don't pair our carbohydrates with a fat or protein, or a combination of both of those, if we don't pair them and we just consume it by itself, the brain has a hard time even knowing that we've had enough or acknowledging that this is too much and being able to stop. So I just find this very intriguing, especially as we attach these two topics of gluttony and gluten, that the body just has a hard time with that. And then when we have those, modified strands of gluten in there that our body doesn't know what to do with, it just interferes with any of the communication between the cells, and it's just kind of mind-blowing. So there actually is, they sound fun together, but they also, I think, correlate. Thinking of pairing. Yep, pairing our. Are you talking about pairing your protein and fat with your carbohydrates or your gluten? Let me know what you're thinking here. Okay, gluten. Last week I mentioned, right? Okay, so I talked. Sorry, I'm gonna find where I'm at in my notes. So the gluten now, this the 42 new strands of gluten, right? It has a way of breaking down the stomach lining and the intestinal lining, so that things that should be processed in the belly or discarded by the intestines can leak out into the bloodstream and be considered, toxins that attaches ourselves to our cells. And this can result in a very large range of issues within our bodies, even if you're not celiac, right? I just want to warn you about this stuff. When we are addressing how to steward this temple of the Holy Spirit, right? Participating in the healing and the abundance God has for us, so that we are capable to do all that God has called us to do, just wanting to empower you and not discourage you, okay? This is not about discouraging you, but these are things that I want to say. I shared this last week, but I want to briefly cover it again. The red flags that you want to look out for is bloating, inflammation, anxiety, arthritis, joint pain, weight gain, depression, anxiety, constipation, fatigue, infertility, iron deficiency, skin issues like acne or eczema or autoimmune disorders. All of these, if you're struggling with any of these things, cutting gluten out would be a wise thing to do. So I want to tell you how to keep an eye out for it and what processes you can do to start moving away from it. So I'm going to tell you the aliases of gluten, because it is sneaky, okay? It's sneaky. It goes by all kinds of names, or just sneaks in underneath other names. Like it might be another, it might be a different substance, but it sneaks in with that. Does that make sense? Okay. Hydrologized plant protein, which is also HPP. So when you're looking at your ingredient label, these are things that you want to take note of. It hides in rice malt or rice syrup. Like, rice doesn't have gluten in it. Why would they put any kind of glutinous filler in rice syrup or rice malt? Modified food starch could be in there. Gelatinized starch, dextrin, malt, maltodextrin, natural flavorings. Okay, get this, you guys. This term, natural flavorings, does not have limitations on it. The food industry has given it this label, the ability of somebody to keep kind of like their recipe secret per se, and just put a bunch of different things in this underneath this term, natural flavorings. I did a little bit more research on this term yesterday and was just kind of mind blown. They're starting to put some more regulations on this term of natural flavorings, but even organic natural flavorings, only 30% of it has to be actual, like, non-GMO. What? Yeah. So they're going to be changing that apparently, so that 95% of the ingredients in that natural flavoring has to be non-GMO and organic. But I just what? Okay. Next is monosodium glutamate, MSG. So you might have some gluten hiding in there. Hydrologized HVP. So those are some things to just take note of as warnings of where gluten might be hiding. You're going to want to look in some certain places. I'm going to now tell you where it tends to hide. Because it's not always, just bread. It's not always wheat, things that have wheat in it. Right? Okay, so medications can have gluten in them. And it's not going to be on your bottle. You'll, like, if it's a prescription, you're going to have to go to Google and research what exactly is in your prescription. Pharmacists don't even know about this. So they're starting to become the pharmaceutical industry is starting to become more aware of it now that, autoimmune issues are up and celiac stuff is up. They're becoming more aware of it and hopefully changing some things within the industry. But you'll want to look out for, look into your medications. Also supplements. You're going to want to make sure that your supplements are gluten-free and that they are soy-free too. Just, that's a freebie, soy-free. You're going to want that. You can find some of those ingredients that I mentioned above in your coffee creamer, in your gum, in your mayonnaise, in your ketchup, in your flavored tea, in your hot dogs, and in your spice mixes. So just a heads up, you want to check your ingredients. And now listen, I am not trying to steal your birthday. Okay, this is not about being a downer. Okay, this is about empowering you to know, be aware of what you're actually putting in your temple. It's not meant to limit you, but empower you. So I just want to encourage you in that. When you start looking for these things, it will become second nature. All right, it'll become second nature, and it's going to be easier when you go grocery shopping and all of that. Now, if you are thinking that this might be a good thing to do, switching to gluten-free, I know that it can feel so overwhelming, but when you get a plan in place, it can be much more helpful. So I don't know, tell me if you are, even if you're watching a replay, tell me if you're more of a rip the Band-Aid off or ease it off type of person. I am more of the all or nothing. I don't know if you could tell, but so, maybe purging the pantry. I want to give you a few tips on how to do that, whether you are more of you want to do it more slowly, or if you want to do it fast. You want to look, obviously first in the bread box and try and switch some of those things out. But getting a plan in place, you want to know what are you going to do with the things that you decide to get rid of that are in your pantry. Because there are people that don't care about gluten or some of these ingredients and just want some good food. So who are you going to give it to? You don't want to just throw it away. So create a plan there. And then do a little bit of research and find out what you want to replace it with before you just, throw it all out or get rid of it all. Figure out what you want to replace certain foods with, so you're not kind of all of a sudden in a lurch go and feeling anxiety about not knowing what to eat, So plan. That's good. Have a plan. I'm telling you, solve so many issues. And you can get a notepad out and just write down as you run out of things. Just write it down what you want to switch it to, and then when you go grocery shopping, you're ready. So you want to start with the bread box, move to the pantry into all of those boxed meals you might have, or, canned stuff that you might have, and snacks. When it comes to snacks, fruits and veggies are always, the best option. But there's other things out there. Sometimes, you want to have a little chips. There are chips out there that are clean and that you can indulge in. And popcorn, you guys, popcorn's one of my favorite go-tos. And I have a great recipe for popcorn. I will pop it up here. I will pop the recipe for popcorn in the group so that you can have that. So snack-wise, you want to look at those. Okay. How strict do you have to be? And the thought popped into my mind, how much sin is okay? I think that's you, Lenny, saying that. Yeah, you know, and here's the thing. When we are talking about food, you know, it's so personal. It's not, we have to remember that this is like not necessarily a moral issue. It's just a choice that we make. I mean, there's not like this right or wrong. Obviously, if the Lord is telling you to do something, you want to obey. If he's saying, I want you to nix gluten and see how your body does, then you want to obey that, right? But ultimately, there's nowhere in the Bible that says, you know, you have to just eat these things and not these things. So there's you know, there's dairy in the Bible, there's sweets with honey, there's wine, and all of these things. It's just about discerning what's going to be best for your body at the right time, and maybe where the Lord is leading, and testing out things. So yeah. But I have found that really being careful about gluten has helped me immensely, especially as it you know, dealing with thyroid issues. So yeah, just sticking with the real food. And you know, there are, you know, flours and things out there with better and not modified gluten in it. So just being aware and empowered to make wise choices, I think is important. So I think that's about it. We talked about the why. We talked about how Jesus is the key, right? We want to focus on him more than the gluten. And that God will turn our meager efforts into abundance. In our brokenness that we bring to him, right? Our meager efforts, in the small actions that we take every day, he turns them into something great. And before we know it, we might be witnessing a miracle just by doing little things and being obedient to simple steps daily. Okay, we talked a little bit about what gluttony in the Bible. And then practically, we looked at glutens, aliases, and hiding spots, and how we can make a switch. Now, you know, I do have Warrior Wellness, which is a coaching program that we offer in Train in Truth. And it's all about just nurturing the body, soul, and spirit, and to really feel like more than a conqueror in our body, living abundantly, right? And in there, we offer grocery lists, meal plans, and all of that stuff where we really coach through this kind of transition. So if you're interested in that, there is a link that I included. You can see if it would be a good fit for you. And then next week, come back, because it's really going to be, we're digging into this topic about how our mind renewal affects our physical health. I mean, really, it's mind-blowing. I just want to share one statistic. 87% of physical illness is a result from thought life. Only 13% to diet, genetics, and environment. What? Isn't that crazy? So we're going to break this down a little bit and dig into this topic next week, next Friday at 9 a.m. right here. I'd love to have you live to chat about it. Anyway, I'm super excited, and I hope to see you there. All right, you guys, have a great weekend. So glad to do this with you and to chat about all these things. All right, I'll talk to you later.